The world wants to be created. It doesn't want to be owned. It doesn't want to be caged. It doesn't want that. And as we've moved through history and time, I think what we have really found is that this notion of controlling the world is really a failed enterprise. In America, we have a myth of frontiers. You know, we have a myth of opportunism. We have a myth of individuality. The myth of individuality is this huge shadow that we have over our country right now. You know, whether you wear a mask or not. I mean, these kinds of things. And I think if you don't or are not aware of what you think of as being your myth, then it's worth looking at, because if you begin to reflect upon what your life is about and what your life circumstances happen to be, the mythic quality that you bring to it allows you to feed what it is.
Hello, my name is Clay Boykin, and I am a founder and your host of In Search of the New Compassionate Male. It's no secret that centuries of patriarchy and a skewed sense of masculinity bear much of the responsibility for steering humanity away from the nature of the deep feminine. Male empowerment has formed the foundation upon which our current cultural and political conditions rest. I believe a new compassionate male is emerging as the new archetype. These programs are for anyone interested in the topic of men and compassion. Join my producer, Dennis Tardan, and me as we pick up on the conversation with Dana.
I find with Gard, he just seems to exemplify the notion of somebody who can unify these masculine and feminine principles and walk the walk. And I mean, be out there in the world and transact in that sort of a way. I've been in the freelance producing business since the 70s. I mean, I've really only had a day job a couple times and only really looked for it. And you get used to how projects end and how they come and go. And after our first book together, about just as it was we were taking delivery of the boxes of books, I got this call from him saying, I want to pack your bags. I want to take you to Switzerland. We're going to go to the Jung Institute. The reality of, you know, when he showed me your show with him, I was just reinforced by what a genuine human being he is. You know, you two, I've watched the two of you through his, and I watched these other programs that you guys are doing. I mean, this is, it's a nice project you have going. You know,
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
What a lovely thing to say, because we're both in our growth phase.
Yeah.
We're both in a heavy growth phase. And one of the reasons why Clay framed this as in search of is to get us out of the fact that we might be at a destination and asking everybody else to come join us.
mm-hmm.
It's to help us in the creation of this. What does this mean? If the patriarchy has run its route, and we now have to have something to replace it and to be more healthy, so that how can we show up? This is where you, Clay, came in, and knowing that it feels like that we're at a time in history. In our history in the human race, where something new needs to emerge. And so in all of your studies, Dana, and all of the work that you're doing, Clay, and then I get a chance to bring my curiosity into this process because I want in.
Yeah.
Well, I feel very similarly in that I think we have nothing but journey, and everything that we are doing has a kind of a wandering, peripatetic kind of quality to it. And if we never get anywhere, that's fine. I mean, to me, it really is about the Odyssey. It's about, there's a wonderful poem by C.V. Cavafy. It's called Ithaca. And it basically talks about taking a long time to get there. Don't be in any rush to get home. Just allow yourself the opportunities of whatever the adventure happens to be. Let the adventure reveal itself. In a way, it's like the Tom Waits song, take the long way home. and I really think that we don't want to really be in a hurry to get where we're going, because we're liable to miss something along the way. And I just think this is wisdom to raise your children with.
What are the things that are on your heart right now? The things that are exciting you, the things that are making that you're saying, I'm curious about that. I want to go that way.
Well,
let's explore this for a little bit.
One of the outlets that I have for my spirit of inquiry, and I do have an enraged spirit of inquiry. Part of it is probably being a Gemini, but I really have no shortage of paths that I can go out to.
I can imagine.
About 4 years ago, I was watching my wife do her book club here in the house. And these women were having the most fascinating conversations. God, I was sitting at my desk where I'm sitting now, and I was just salivating. I can't go down into the dining room, and I don't eavesdrop, but I'm just watching the quality of engagement. And it was seductive like you wouldn't believe. And so I spoke to one of my writing friends, and she said, well, why don't you start a salon? Why don't you, make something, and I mean, people who know me will say, well, that's just not so. But I think of myself as not having a very extrovert. I'm kind of a shy person. And I that's probably not the accurate way to describe me, because nothing I do seems to have any shyness or introversion about it.
Right.
But I went down, and she introduced me to this young fellow named Will Lynn, who, Clay, you will meet when you come on the Myth Salon. But the Myth Salon came out of that initial meeting. And I went down to Will, and I said, I have this idea, and what I want to do is I want to have this Myth Salon, and I will invite people into my home, and we'll do a monthly thing. And I think I can build this, but I want you to be my moderator. I want you to be my Bill Moyers. I want you to sit there and talk, and I want to listen, and that was 4 years ago. And every month we would bring about 30 or 40 people into the downstairs room, sometimes into the upstairs room, but we have two different setups in my home where I can do these. Well, fast forward to the pandemic, and you can't congregate. So our featured Myth Salon panelist for March was supposed to be Christopher Vogler, who has taken Joseph Campbell's work, and he's written a book called The Writer's Journey. And the book is immensely popular. It is now going into its 25th year. We're having another event in about a month and a half with Chris. And I said, we can't do this in my house, but what if we went online? What if we did this and we got there's this thing called Zoom, and at that point I'd never done a Zoom. I didn't know what I was doing. And we put it together, and very quickly I realized that the first thing I did was, when the pandemic hit, I called 9 of my friends and I went on Zoom and we did I'll call it a meeting like this, except we had 9 of us. 9 is a good number to fill up the screen. And these were professor friends and academics and various people that I thought could express themselves in one thing and another. I was deeply concerned about the pandemic at that particular time. There were very low deaths in America. I mean, hundreds moving past 1,000, moving to 2,000, but the handwriting was on the wall, and I just had to have some outlet. So I created this outlet with these people, and these became the core panelists that we now use in the Myth Salon. And so we invited Chris on there, and immediately we went from having 30 people in my home to having several hundred people online. And I mean, it was just like, you know.
Let me ask a question. Why myth?
Well, we have everything that we construct as a mental construct has a mythic quality about it. I mean, whether it's organization or change or structure or relation, I mean, whatever word you want to give it is a belief system. I mean, it's something, it's a way in which you've constructed the world to make order for yourself. And what we do psychically is that we construct a overt spiritual quality, which has to do with existence in the cosmos and all that kind of thing, all the way down to the interior part of what gets us through the day. And there are mythic intervals in between. So to me, it's all myth. I mean, you make it up. I mean, even people without a myth have the myth of no myth. You know, they have constructed a world that, to me, there is a spiritual quality about the nature of myth, because it wants an expression outside of itself. And whether you talk about it as divine or archetypal or whatever it happens to be, it's the engine that kind of works us and gets us through the day. I also am on the faculty, I'm on the adjunct faculty at Pacifica Graduate Institute, which is a school of mythology and depth psychology. So it was a natural way for me to cultivate an audience that resonated with the people who are part of that community. It can stretch. I mean, in America, we have a myth of frontiers. You know, we have a myth of opportunism. We have a myth of individuality. The myth of individuality is this huge shadow that we have over our country right now. You know, whether you wear a mask or not. I mean, these kinds of things. And I think if you don't or are not aware of what you think of as being your myth, then it's worth looking at, because if you begin to reflect upon what your life is about and what your life circumstances happen to be, the mythic quality that you bring to it allows you to feed what it is. If you think about the things that are inside you, that inhabit you, think about a good wolf, a white wolf, and a bad wolf, a black wolf. You know, and they're doing battle inside you. And you may have heard this story, you know, and I love it because basically the things that are inside you, which ones win out? Well, the ones that win out are the ones you feed. You take this attitude, and if you've ever seen somebody who, you know, like everything rains on them, and they get every red light, and there's a problem around every corner. Well, this is a manufactured myth. They believe that. They're sure that there won't be a table at the restaurant, and sure enough, they show up at the restaurant and there's no table. Well,
Exactly.
you know,
there's so much about Dana. I agree. Clay?
Well, I was just going to say, first of all, I pick a parking space at Whole Foods on the upper deck, and I'm within 1 or 2 slots most of the time. You know, it's just what you do. I'm going to struggle with this just a little bit.
Okay.
But this old book fell off my case
I know it well.
the other day. This is Brown and, 1974, and I hadn't read it in years. And when I picked it up, I've read this page 100 times since I picked it up. It says that oftentimes when a new era in history begins, a myth for that era springs up at the same time. The myth is sort of a preview of what's to come and contains sage advice for coping with the psychological elements of the time. And everybody's talking like, okay, we're at this defining moment in our history, that this is the cusp of change, the tail of the dragon, however you want to describe it. And so I asked my guys last night, I said, okay, well, if that's the case, what's our new myth? Knowing that none of us could answer that question. And if I go back, I go back and read the Holy Grail as he goes through it here, and Parsifal, gives him the cup. What ails you? I'm thirsty. Here's the cup, and the cup turns into the Holy Grail. And that was an act of compassion. So to me, that Holy Grail is compassion. And we've been running with a patriarchy, for thousands of years, but the patriarchy's been running right next to our Grail myth. And it's gotten us to where we are, both good and bad. And so to me, it's like, where do you, if we are at this crossover point, what's to come? And what is our new myth?
Well, a fellow, I think Christopher Alexander did a thing called pattern language. And he's talking about architecture, and the quote, I think, comes largely from Churchill, but I'm sure it has deeper roots than that. But basically, we build our structures, and then our structures build us. And if you think about language and the way in which we form our original languages, our languages were really created to give us a sense of control over the world that we were finding ourselves in. The original stories that were told around campfires all were oral. They were dynamic. They didn't have written words until maybe the 8th century, 7th century, before the Common Era. And so what you had was a story that was alive, a story that would be modified in the telling of the story. And along comes the alphabet, and the alphabet had a way of caging the story so that the storyteller became displaced over time and was replaced by the story. The story then becomes something that you could carry with you. You could move it forward in time, and it was unchanging. That's patriarchy. The whole notion of seizing control and wresting control from the deep feminine that is really inside all of us is the thing that mothers our creativity. This whole notion that we can create out of nothing something. And that's an illusion, because basically it is connected to the archetypes that are part of the engine of existence. The world wants to be created. It doesn't want to be owned. It doesn't want to be caged. It doesn't want that. And as we've moved through history and time, I think what we have really found is that this notion of controlling the world is really a failed enterprise. And that the more, if you've ever done a sport where you need court sense, or what you need to do is flow with it, like swimming or surfing or skiing or one of these mountain climbing. These are dynamic exercises that really call for us to be responsive. And that response mechanism is something that it feeds our aliveness. We forget how long we've been doing something. The Greeks had a word for time spent that way as kairos.
Yes.
And so it is a way that in which the flow or involvement is the food of the energy. It's not chronic. We're not looking at the watch and saying, okay, are we there yet? Is it 15 minutes? You know, that sort of thing. They recognized, of course, you know, as we do, that, you know, schedules are important, and there's a yin and a yang quality to everything. And so kairos, being a very feminine principle of being involved in an activity, is a way that somehow or another we can wrap ourselves in the illusion that time is meaningless, that it is really the soul of our enterprise. Who knows what the soul of our enterprise is? But if we lose our spirit of involvement, if we lose our soul in the process, what have we gained? And I just think the more conversant we become, you used parking spaces. A chapter in my dissertation was called Parking Spaces. Now, imagine that you're flying over a downtown area, or in today's technology, you could use a drone, you know, and that would be fine. You would watch these parking spaces open up and close down, open up here, close down there. It would be like a jazz concert. You know, the little open spaces going, they would be moving around like that.
Yes.
In order to find a parking space in a congested area, you just simply have to leave and be there and be available for the parking space when it's open. You can't plan that. You can't say, well, if I go here at a quarter of, its parking space is going to be open, because they're not. That isn't the way parking spaces work. And it's a sense of timing. So timing is not the right time. Its timing is being in the moment. And so when you are in the flow, you're in the moment. And all you have to do is drive up and go and park your car, and you're out. And you know, you're no longer constrained by the idea of looking for a parking space. Mm-hmm. A parking space is only something of value when you need it. It's of no value to walk down the street and see an empty parking space. Oh, there's one. That, you know.
No, the parking space is always right behind me.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you go around the block, you can count on the fact that by the time you go around the block, somebody else will have pulled into that parking space, and you weren't at the right time or in the right place.
Yep.
So Jung calls these synchronicities. Mm-hmm. I am inclined to think that in a divine world, there are no accidents, that all is in its right place, in its right time, and that we are constantly in the flow of synchronicities, and this is where we need to be.
Yes. I can see that, and Dana, it's been so much my experience that I can feel it when the flow is happening. Mm-hmm. I can actually, there's an experience of it. I have to dial down my sensations a couple of levels, get to that level of mindfulness. But when I get there, I can actually experience it happening. Not continually, but I can keep checking back to it and have it.
Dana, what that means to me, on those occasions when that 12 string is perfectly tuned, and you know what I'm talking about, there's a resonance about it. You can just touch it and it just lights up. That to me is what I think about in being in the flow.
Well, and we talked guitars the other day, and I don't know if you know this, Dennis. I play guitar a little bit, but certainly not well enough to have a wall of guitars like that. But I did have a gift.
Do you do it well enough to enjoy it?
I did at
There you go.
I don't play very much anymore.
Well, tell him what you had.
I had a Gibson B2512, just like Clay has. I think creativity is something that if we become fearless and we're not afraid to be foolish, often what we do is masks a fear of being foolish, appearing like I'm going to do something that embarrasses me.
Yes.
And if we can get past that moment of embarrassment, and particularly as young kids, I was reading on your introductory page, Clay, about you and some of your, I guess, grade school friends and things like that. Mm-hmm. One of the characteristics that I had to contend with was size, and so I'm not a monster now, but I will say normal size. I'm like 5'9" or something like that. But at the time, I was little. I mean, diminutive. And it's sort of an amusement factor. I mean, I had a small car, and I remember being on the swim team, and I came out, and my fellow team members had taken my car and set it up in the ivy, carried it off of the street, and lifted it up into the ivy. And I'm talking, 20 yards off of the street. And it was playful. It was kind of mean, mm-hmm. but it was something that you wouldn't do to the football player. I mean, and it was a little tiny Fiat. And I thought, okay, what I realized was that you can use size, even small size, to your advantage. And size, when it's sort of anti-size, can open doors. People look at you and they don't perceive you to be a threat. You stand there and you can develop a gracious, humble sort of quality about you. You can open up your story, and people will, well, gee, I can't do that for you, but maybe so-and-so down the street can. And I really think that we benefit from, there's 4 things that I think are a key to, and they're good survival techniques. And imagination, adaptability, coordination, and humility. Imagination kind of opens up the door. What am I going to go do? Adaptability has to do with the changing circumstances that are coming at you. Coordination means you have to be able to reach for it and grab it. It's going to be coming by you at a certain amount of speed. And humility has to do with the whole notion of not taking it as yours, not believing that you had anything to do with it, but keeping that circle alive, keeping these 4 capabilities alive. Mm. I just find that...
It's beautiful.
Well, I heard in mythology, the ancient cultures all had nature mythologies. I mean, however you wanted to position them, and whether you're talking about the Greeks or the Romans or the Egyptians or the Mesopotamians or the Chinese, they were all about coexisting with the natural world. And some of those have to do with change, some have to do with order, some have to do with priority. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that the myths they come to us. The one that really struck me was change, was the whole notion of this becoming that, like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, a young man becoming an old man. The stages that we go through that are completely transient, ephemeral, they don't last forever. You can't make them permanent even when you try. And so the spirit of changes in Greek mythology is Hermes. And Hermes has to do with both the masculine and the feminine coordinating themselves toward some sort of archetypal end, whatever it happens to be. And so he's the messenger. I mean, he is Apollo's brother. Apollo is a real control sort of guy. I mean, you know, he is the order. He's the thing that runs cities, but he's also, he's the father of Phaethon. Now, Phaethon is the son that wants to rebel against the order. And so the two work in companionship with one another. And they were brought to life by Ovid, who wrote in the first century of the Romans situation, a Roman civilization, brought to life really by Mary Zimmerman, wrote this play that was released maybe 10 or 12 years ago. It's really worth seeing, about the metamorphoses. Change is the way that things get done. There's nothing static. It just simply moves. And if you think of the dynamic of a river, you know, you can watch it. And there's a mesmerizing quality of being by a river or an ocean or cloud formations or watching birds or anything where there's natural movement. But again, Hermes is the spirit that fills the human awareness with, what does this mean and how is it? And it's not like you come up with a way that it is, but you're watching it as a dynamic. It's like never-ending music. And I just resonated with that and feel that the whole idea of flow comes out of that. I really think, you know, I'll go back a few years before that. Another friend of mine, Conrad Johnson, who lives up north, brilliant photographer. In my producing career, I always sought to hire the best people. And then I would shadow them. I would try to watch how they work, and I'd try to figure out what they do. And I hired him any number of times to do the work that I didn't feel confident enough to undertake myself. And he brought me in Robert Bly's Iron John, you know, and this is what, 1980 something, somewhere along in there. And then he gave me Sam Keen's Fire in the Belly. And I realized, Sam Keen, I got to meet him. So I looked him up. He was up in Sonoma, and I called him up. He answered his phone. And I said, I want to come up there and I want to meet you. And so I got in my car and drove up there, and I spent an afternoon with him. And next thing I know, I'm getting trading emails with him. And he was doing a talk down in Santa Barbara at this place that was an extension of Pacifica. That got me on their mailing list. And the whole thing started with essentially one man availing himself to another. You don't ever know where these seemingly incidental, non-linear contacts are going to go. And, you know, I just feel like my life is blessed with bridges. People build bridges toward me. You asked about, you know, the Myth Salon earlier. I'm constantly calling people up and having people come in. And these are, you know, people large and small, world-class, not known. I mean, I just go by the seat of my pants and I say, you know, I'd like to put you in front of an audience and I'd like to have you, you know, let's talk about this. And we bring them in, and we have a fellow coming on Thursday night who is a world-class scholar, a fellow named Dr. Ashok Bedi, and he's doing a talk on Patanjali Yoga. Now, he's comparing that, and he's working with Jung and yoga. But what a gracious, beautiful man. And I just am struck by how people will show up, come in there, talk from their heart, bring out a feeling that really resonates through the community. It's just beautiful. And every 2 weeks we're doing this. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, I can't say enough about it. May I take one brief moment, and I want to share with you the last time that I was together at the Myth Salon with Roger Walsh. I mean, this man is exquisite. He is so polished, and I feel completely rough and unpolished, like something sort of like just the unpolished stone moving it down. In any event, I open my Myth Salons with a singing bowl and a poem. And a lot of times I will reference a poem, you know, by somebody like Mary Oliver or Rumi or something like that. And occasionally, well, so what I did was, on that particular morning, I was struggling with where I was going to go and not wanting to appear foolish, and this image jumped out. And I wrote this short poem. It's not very long. It won't take up more of your, you know.
Go for it.
And it's called The Fool. The Fool. Get out of the way, self. There are places to go, things to do. But churning inside me, fears of appearing foolish rush over me like a tsunami. Each task forming a cage around my soul, narrowing my identity to my desires. When I was drenched, all that remained was the fool I had become. Unable to keep myself dry any longer, my tasks lay beneath the ocean inside me. Empty shells on the sandy bottom, no longer filled with purpose.
Dana, thank you so much. Thank you for today, for giving us the opportunity to spend some time with you. And what's lovely about this for me is that it's such a non-linear experience. Mm-hmm. To be able to have and to follow trails of interest and conversation and get them to these continuing the myth into the canyons and looking at the sides and then scrolling back along and then sitting over here. It's such a lovely experience to get a chance to know you and to see what we could explore together, because your life and your times and what you're doing here on the planet is profound. I feel the echoes resonating from what you're doing to where we're going and through where we're going, and those they resonate so deeply, like that 12 string.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary to have met you, and I thank you for the time that you've given me to be here today, and I would love it only if I could get an opportunity to continue the conversation with you in the future.
I think you're both beautiful men. I'm deeply honored to have been invited here today, and yeah, this has been a very special day for me. So thank you very much, and I hope you'll send me whatever you come up with out of this, and then I can send it to my mom, who loves to see whatever it is that I'm doing. You know, as she's fond of saying, you do know that I love what you're doing. I go, yes, Mom. Yeah, and I love you too.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Clay. Thank you for taking us on the search of the new compassionate male, and we will see you next time.